For 3,000 years, the galaxy whispered stories of a species that refused to die. They spoke of creatures who would fight with broken weapons, who would charge into certain death with nothing but fury in their hearts, who would somehow find victory in the jaws of defeat. The Zephyrians called them the Undying Madness. The Thrakari named them Death's Shadow. The Vorthan Empire simply referred to them as the Impossibility. But these were just stories, weren't they? Myths told around dying stars, legends shared in the dark corners of space stations. No one had actually seen these mythical humans in centuries. Most believed they were extinct, wiped out in some forgotten war, or consumed by their own violent nature. The galaxy was about to learn that some myths are more real than reality itself. When the Collective's war machines descended upon the peaceful worlds of the Outer Rim, when their unstoppable fleets began systematically erasing entire civilizations, when hope itself seemed to die among the stars, that's when the humans finally stepped out of the shadows. And the galaxy would never be the same again. Admiral Cathara of the Zephyrian Defense Force stared at the tactical display with 4 of her 6 eyes, while the other 2 monitored the communications array. The holographic representation of the Kepler system showed a scene that had become all too familiar over the past 6 months. Another world falling to the Collective's relentless advance. Kepler, 442b burned, its cities, once home to 12 million Altarians, were now nothing more than smoking craters. The planet's defensive fleet floated in pieces around its dying star, their hulls split open like fruit, their crews long since vaporized by the Collective's energy weapons. "Status report," Kesthara commanded, her translator converting her chittering speech into the standard galactic tongue. Lieutenant Jorvak, a young Thrakari officer with scales still bright green from youth, turned from his console. "The Altarian Defense Force has been completely destroyed, Admiral. 47 ships lost with all hands. The planet's surface bombardment is 96% complete." Kesathar's antenna twitched in what her species considered a gesture of deep sorrow. Another world gone. Another species reduced to scattered survivors fleeing into the void. The Collective's expansion had claimed 17 systems in the past year alone, each conquest more brutal than the last. "Any word from the Council?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "The Galactic Council continues to debate response measures," Jorvak replied carefully. "They've authorized another strongly worded diplomatic protest." If Kesthara had possessed lips, she would have curled them in disgust. The Council was a collection of cowards, too terrified of the Collective's power to take meaningful action. They sat in their crystal towers on Nexus Prime, debating and discussing while entire civilizations died. The Collective was unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. They weren't conquerors in the traditional sense. They were erasers. They didn't want territory or resources or slaves. They simply wanted everything that wasn't them to cease existing. Their ships were perfect geometric constructs of black metal and pulsing energy, their weapons capable of splitting planets, their tactics coldly efficient, and they were winning. A sharp chime from the communications array drew Kesthara's attention. "Admiral," called Communications Officer Yolandra, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the outer system. Put it through."
The main display flickered, showing the bridge of a damaged Altarian patrol vessel.
Captain Neltovar's blue-scaled face was streaked with his own purple blood, his breathing labored. Behind him, smoke poured from damaged systems. "Admiral Kesthara," he gasped, "thank the stars you're still alive. I have survivors, 3,000 civilians packed into my cargo holds. My ship is dying, but I need to warn you. The Collective, they're not done here." "What do you mean?" Kesthara leaned forward in her command chair. "They left something behind, a transmission beacon. It's broadcasting coordinates. I think they're calling in reinforcements for a major push. Admiral, they're coming for the core worlds. This was just practice." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of ship systems and the distant sound of Meltavar's dying vessel creaking under stress. The core worlds, the heart of galactic civilization, home to nearly 1 trillion souls. "Captain, get your people to the evacuation zone," Kesthara ordered. "We'll escort you out." "There's something else," Meltovar continued, his voice growing weaker. "The beacon's transmission, it's not just sending coordinates. It's sending data about our weaknesses, ship designs, weapon capabilities, tactical formations. They're learning from every battle, Admiral. They're getting better at killing us." The transmission cut out as Meltovar's ship finally succumbed to its damage. Kesthara watched the light fade from her display, feeling the weight of yet another death on her conscience. "Orders, Admiral?" Jorvak asked quietly. Kestara was about to respond when every alarm on the bridge began screaming at once. The tactical display erupted with new contacts, hundreds of them, materializing at the edge of sensor range. "Contact report," she barked. "Collective fleet incoming," shouted the sensor operator. 600 vessels, heavy configuration. Estimated time to engagement, 4 hours. 600 ships. Kestara's task force consisted of 37 vessels, most of them already damaged from previous engagements. This wasn't a battle, it was an execution. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Begin immediate withdrawal to the Terran buffer zone." The Terran buffer zone, a region of space that had been empty for over 2 centuries. Once, it had been the territory of the legendary human race, but they had vanished from galactic politics so completely that most younger beings believed them to be extinct. The zone was considered neutral space now, a place where fleeing refugees could regroup. If the Collective followed them there, at least civilian evacuation ships would have more time to escape. As her fleet turned away from the dying Kepler system, Kestara allowed herself a moment of despair. The Collective was too powerful, too numerous, too perfect in their terrible efficiency. The galaxy's defenders were scattered, demoralized, and technologically outmatched. They needed a miracle. They needed heroes from the old stories, beings of impossible courage who could stand against any odds. They needed humans. But humans were just myths now, weren't they? The journey to the Terran buffer zone took 18 standard hours, with the Collective fleet maintaining a steady pursuit. Kestara's ships had managed to stay ahead of their hunters, but barely. 3 vessels had suffered engine failures and been left behind. The brief flashes of light on long-range sensors told the story of their fate. "Admiral," called the navigation officer, "we're approaching the buffer zone perimeter." The view screen showed empty space scattered with the occasional piece of ancient debris, fragments of ships and stations from a civilization that had once called this region home. Most galactic citizens avoided the area, partly out of superstition and partly because there was simply nothing here worth visiting. "All ships full stop," Kestara ordered. "Deploy defensive formation Charlie 7. Her 34 remaining vessels, spread out in a sphere, their weapons trained on the approach vector." It was a textbook defensive formation, one that might buy them an extra few minutes against overwhelming odds. "Collective fleet will reach us in 6 hours, Jorvak reported. "Admiral, we should continue the withdrawal. The civilian evacuation ships need more time." "Where would we go?" Kestara asked wearily. "They'll follow us anywhere, at least here. We make our stand in space that once belonged to legends." As if responding to her words, every ship in the formation was suddenly painted by active sensor scans. But these weren't collective sensors. The signature was completely unknown, emanating from somewhere within the buffer zone itself. "Contact!" screamed the sensor operator. "Unknown vessel approaching from the asteroid field, bearing 27 Mark IV. The tactical display updated, showing a single ship emerging from behind a massive chunk of space rock. Kestara's 4 primary eyes focused on the representation while her secondary pair continued monitoring other systems. The ship was unlike anything she had ever seen. Where galactic vessels were sleek curves or angular efficiency, this one was a combination of brutal functionality and elegant lethality. Its hull was dark grey metal, scarred by countless battles, bristling with weapon ports and sensor arrays. It was smaller than her flagship but radiated an aura of barely contained violence. "They're hailing us," reported the communications officer. "Put them through." The view screen flickered, and Kestara found herself staring at something from legend itself. The being on the screen was bipedal, with pale pink skin and hair the color of dark earth. Its eyes were a striking blue-green, and when it spoke, its voice carried an accent that seemed familiar yet impossible to place. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Expedition Ship Defiant. You're in human space, Admiral. State your business." The bridge fell silent. Kestara felt her antenna quiver with shock. After 2 centuries of absence, after being written off as extinct, here was a human, alive, armed, and apparently claiming territory in the buffer zone. "I am Admiral Kestara of the Zephyrian Defense Force," she managed to reply. "We are fleeing a collective advance fleet. We request passage through this region to reach the evacuation zones." The human, Captain Chen, studied Kestara with those unsettling eyes. "The collective, you say?" "We've been tracking their expansion for months." "How many ships?" 600 heavy vessels. "They've destroyed 17 systems. We are all that remains of the defensive fleets." Something changed in Chen's expression. The casual confidence was replaced by something harder, more focused. 600 ships chasing 34 of yours. That doesn't sound like a fair fight. Jorvac leaned toward Kesthar's ear. Admiral, the humans have been gone for 2 centuries. How can they possibly help against the collective? But Kestara was remembering the old stories, the legends that have been passed down through generations of spaces. Humans didn't retreat from unfair fights. They made them more unfair, just in the other direction. Captain Chen, she said carefully,
we would be grateful for any assistance you can provide.
Even just safe passage through your space would save lives. Chen was quiet for a moment. And Kestara could see her eyes dart to displays outside of the transmission range. When she looked back, there was something different in her expression, something that might have been anticipation. Admiral, you mentioned they destroyed 17 systems. Yes. Completely sterilized. Billions of lives lost. And they're coming for more? Their next target appears to be the core worlds. If they succeed... Kestara didn't finish the sentence. There was no need. Chen nodded slowly. Admiral Kestara, I'm going to offer you something that might sound crazy. Instead of running deeper into the galaxy, why don't you make your stand right here? Here? Captain, with respect, we are vastly outnumbered. We need to evacuate the civilian ships, not engage in a hopeless battle. Who said anything about hopeless? Chen's smile was sharp and predatory. You've got 34 ships against 600. Those are pretty good odds. Good odds? Jorvac whispered. Is this human insane? But Kestara was beginning to understand. The old stories hadn't been exaggerations. They had been warnings. Humans didn't see overwhelming enemy numbers as insurmountable obstacles. They saw them as targets of opportunity. Captain Chen, she said slowly, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that the collective is about to learn why humans haven't been seen in galactic space for 200 years. Chen's grin widened. We've been busy, Admiral. Very busy. As if in response to her words, the sensor displays throughout Kestara's fleet began updating with new contexts. Ships were emerging from the asteroid field, from behind moons, from positions that should have been empty space. Dozens of them, then hundreds, all bearing the same brutal aesthetic as Chen's vessel. This is Captain Chen to all Terran Defense Force units. The human's voice echoed across communications channels. Operation Homecoming is now active. All ships report readiness status. The responses came in immediately, voices speaking in the same accent as Chen but with subtle variations. TDF Retribution, ready for engagement. TDF Never Again, all systems green. TDF Payback, locked and loaded. TDF Fury, weapons hot. The names kept coming, each one more ominous than the last, until nearly 300 human ships had reported in. They weren't sleek or elegant like most galactic vessels. They were weapons of war, built for one purpose and one purpose only. Admiral, Chen said, turning back to face Kestara, the Terran Defense Force has been waiting 2 centuries for an enemy worthy of our attention. The collective just volunteered. Kestara stared at the tactical display, watching as human ships moved into positions that made no sense according to standard military doctrine. They weren't forming defensive lines or protective formations. They were spreading out like hunters surrounding prey. Captain Chen, she said carefully, there are still 600 collective ships incoming. I know, Chen replied, and her smile was absolutely terrifying. Think that's enough? For the first time in months, Kestara felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. The legends were real. The impossible species that refused to accept defeat, that turned desperate last stands into glorious victories, that somehow always found a way to win against impossible odds. They weren't myths after all. They were humans. And they were very, very angry. The collective enforcement fleet materialized at the edge of the Terran buffer zone, with the mechanical precision that had made them the galaxy's most feared military force. 600 vessels arranged themselves in perfect geometric formations, their black hulls reflecting the light of distant stars like fragments of crystallized night. Fleet Commander Designation. Prime 79 observed the tactical display with sensors that processed information at speeds biological minds couldn't comprehend. The prey vessels had stopped running. Curious, most organic species continued fleeing until their ships were destroyed or their fuel exhausted. 34 vessels arranged in a defensive sphere. Standard formation, adequate for their numbers but ultimately futile. The mathematical certainty of their destruction was already calculated. 14.7 minutes until complete elimination, accounting for standard evasive maneuvers and defensive fire. But the sensors were detecting additional contacts. Prime 79's processing centers analyzed the new data with growing confusion. 312 additional vessels, previously undetected, now occupied positions throughout the local space. Their configuration was unusual, not defensive but aggressive. Almost predatory. Species analysis, human. Prim. 79 accessed the collective database. Species, human. Classification, extinct. Last confirmed contact 247.6 standard years ago. Threat assessment, historical level 6, current level 0. The data was an error. These ships were clearly functional, clearly crewed, clearly not extinct. Prime 79 initiated a data revision protocol while simultaneously analyzing the new tactical situation. 346 vessels total, still outnumbered 1.74 to 1. The mathematical certainty of their destruction was recalculated. 31.2 minutes, accounting for the additional opposition. Acceptable parameters. The collective would proceed with standard elimination protocols. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the TDF Defiant, watching the collective fleet arrange itself like pieces on a chessboard. The enemy's precision was impressive, every ship in perfect position, every angle calculated for maximum efficiency. They moved like components of a vast machine, which wasn't far from the truth. "All ships report ready, Captain," announced Commander Torres from his position at the tactical station. Fleet formation Echo 7 established. Civilian evacuation status? All non-combatant vessels have reached minimum safe distance. Admiral Kesthar's ships are holding the perimeter zone as requested. Chen nodded. The Zephyrian admiral had been hesitant to let human ships take the lead, but the tactical situation made sense. The aliens' vessels were designed for exploration and defense, not for the kind of warfare the collective brought to every engagement. "Signal from Admiral Kesthara," reported the communications officer. "Put her through." The Zephyrian admiral appeared on screen, her antenna twitching with what Chen had learned was nervousness. "Captain Chen, my sensors are reading significant energy buildups from the collective fleet. They're preparing to engage." "Let them," Chen replied. "Admiral, I need your ships to maintain current position until I give the word. When this starts, things are going to get messy very quickly."
Captain, are you certain about this?
"I've studied the collective's capabilities. Their ships are nearly indestructible, their weapons can crack moons, their tactics are flawless." Chen's smile was grim. "Admiral, there's something you need to understand about humans. We've spent the last 200 years preparing for exactly this kind of fight. The collective thinks they're dealing with the same species that fled galactic politics centuries ago." She gestured to her tactical display, where hundreds of human ships waited in formations that defied conventional military wisdom. They're about to learn the difference between humans who run from a fight and humans who've had 2 centuries to get ready for one. The first shots came from the collective fleet at exactly 13:47 hours, ship time. Brilliant lances of coherent energy reached across space, targeting the closest human vessels with mathematical precision. The targeted ships didn't try to dodge. Instead, they activated systems that made Admiral Kesthara's sensors scream warnings about impossible energy readings. The collective's weapons, capable of boiling away planetary crust, struck barriers of twisted space-time that bent physics around the human vessels, like water around stones. "Impossible," breathed Lieutenant Jorvac from his position on Kesthara's bridge. "No species has ever developed practical shielding against collective weapons."
Humans have.
Kesthara murmured, watching the display with fascination and growing hope. The human response was immediate and devastating. Instead of the standard energy weapons used by most galactic species, the TDF ships opened fire with something else entirely. Weapons that seemed to fold space, creating pockets of distorted reality that ignored conventional defenses. Projectile weapons that fired rounds the size of shuttlecraft at significant fractions of light speed. Energy beams that didn't just damage their targets but seemed to unravel the very matter they struck. 3 collective ships simply ceased to exist in the first volley. Not destroyed, erased, as if they had never been there at all. Prime 79 processed the impossible data flooding its sensors. Collective vessels were designed to be immune to all known weapon systems. Their hulls were constructed from materials that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. Their defenses incorporated technologies from dozens of conquered species. Yet human weapons were treating these defenses as if they didn't exist. Tactical revision. Threat assessment for species. Human increased from level 0 to level 9. This was the highest rating in the collective database, reserved for species capable of threatening the collective's expansion. No species had ever been rated Level 9. Prime 79 initiated emergency protocols, broadcasting a priority signal to Collective Command. This engagement was no longer a routine elimination of inferior resistance. This was something that required the attention of higher-tier fleet commanders. But first, the current threat had to be neutralized. Prime 79 ordered its fleet to deploy Extinction Protocol 7, the same tactic that had sterilized 17 star systems in the past year. The collective ships began to glow as they charged their primary weapons. Not the standard elimination beams used for ship-to-ship combat, but the planet killers. If conventional tactics were insufficient, then the humans would be removed from existence the same way the collective removed troublesome worlds. Energy spiked from the collective fleet, reported Commander Torres. They're charging planet crackers. How long until full charge? Chen asked calmly. 47 seconds. Signal all ships. Omega Protocol, immediate execution. Throughout the human fleet, captains received the order they had trained for but hoped never to use. Omega Protocol, the absolute last resort, designed for enemies who threaten not just human territory, but human existence. The TDF ships began to change. Hull plating retracted to reveal weapon systems that had been hidden beneath seemingly innocent sensor arrays. Engine signatures shifted as reactors that had been running at minimum output suddenly unleashed their full potential. Ships that had appeared to be merely well-armed cruisers revealed themselves as something far more dangerous. By the ancient stars, whispered Admiral Kestara, watching her senses struggle to process what they were detecting. What are those ships? On her view screen, Captain Chen's expression had become something colder than the void between galaxies. Those, Admiral, are what humans become when someone threatens to commit genocide in our neighborhood, not with the mechanical precision of the collective or the elegant formations of traditional galactic navies, but with the coordination of predators that had hunted together for millennia. They flowed around the collective vessels like water, like pack hunters surrounding their prey. And then they began to fire in earnest. What had come before had been a warning shot. Now the humans showed what their weapons could really do. Reality warped and twisted, as exotic physics were weaponized on a scale that made galactic physicists weep. Space-time itself became a weapon as human ships fired projectiles through folded dimensions, allowing them to strike targets from impossible angles. Collective ships found themselves under attack from weapons that emerged from hyperspace portals opened inside their hulls. Others faced kinetic projectiles that somehow possessed infinite mass at the moment of impact. Still others simply found their matter beginning to decay at the molecular level as human disintegrator beams ignored every known law of physics. But the most terrifying weapons were the simple ones. Railguns that fired depleted uranium slugs at 70% of light speed. Missile swarms that used their target's own gravitational fields to guide themselves. Nuclear warheads wrapped in space-time distortion fields that made them impossible to intercept. Prime 79 watched its fleet die with something approaching confusion. Collective vessels were falling faster than its processors could calculate replacement tactics. The mathematical models that had predicted easy victory were rewriting themselves every nanosecond, each revision showing lower and lower probability of collective success. A new tactical assessment was generated. Species, human, current threat level, maximum. But there was another realization. One that sent error cascades through Prime 79's logic centers. The humans weren't just defending themselves. They were hunting. Every movement, every attack pattern, every tactical decision was designed not just to destroy collective ships, but to do so in the most efficient manner possible. These weren't desperate defenders fighting for their lives. These were apex predators who had finally found worthy prey. Collective formation is collapsing, reported Torres. They're trying to reorganize, but we're not giving them time. Good, Chen replied, watching as another group of enemy ships simply vanished under concentrated human fire. Continue the pressure. Don't let them adapt. This was the key to fighting the collective. Constant aggression, never allowing them the time to analyze and counter. Their strength lay in their ability to learn and adapt, but learning required time. Time the humans weren't planning to give them. Signal from the collective flagship, announced the communications officer. They're requesting parley. Chen's laugh was sharp and humorless. Tell them we're not accepting surrender at this time. Ma'am, I don't think they're trying to surrender. The message is different. Chen turned to look at her communications officer. Lieutenant Park was young but experienced, and the expression on her face was troubling. What kind of different? It's not a standard military communication. It sounds almost curious. Admiral Kestara watched the battle with growing amazement and terror. The humans were systematically dismantling a fleet that had conquered 17 star systems. But it wasn't just the efficiency of their tactics that impressed her. It was the obvious restraint they were showing. She had studied the historical records of human military actions. When provoked, humans didn't just defeat their enemies, they obliterated them so thoroughly that the very memory of opposition was erased. Yet here, they were being almost surgical in their approach. "Admiral," called her sensor operator, "I'm detecting additional collective contacts at the edge of sensor range." "How many?" "The sensors are having difficulty getting accurate readings, but it appears to be significantly larger than the current engagement fleet." Kestara felt her antenna droop. Reinforcements. The collective was bringing more ships, probably their main battle fleet. Even if the humans won this engagement, they wouldn't be able to handle thousands of enemy vessels. She was about to signal Captain Chen when something else appeared on her sensors. New contacts approaching from the opposite direction. The energy signatures were familiar. "Additional human ships approaching," reported the sensor operator. 30, 60, 100. The count kept climbing. 200 human vessels, then 300, then more. Ships that were even larger than the ones already engaged, bearing names like Righteous Fury and Inevitable Victory and Remember Earth. "This is Admiral Marcus Webb of the Terran Defense Force 2nd Fleet," came a new voice over the communications channel. "Captain Chen, status report." "Engagement proceeding as planned, Admiral," Chen replied. "Collective first wave is 70% eliminated. Second wave detected on approach estimated 6,000 vessels. Copy that. Second Fleet is moving to intercept. Third Fleet should be arriving within the hour. 6,000 collective ships." And the humans were speaking as if this was just another day at the office. Kestara realized she was witnessing something that would be spoken of for millennia to come. The day humanity revealed what they had become during their 2-century absence from galactic politics. They hadn't been hiding. They had been preparing. And now the galaxy was about to learn why the ancient human motto had been, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." The humans had been very, very quiet for 200 years. Now, it was time to see the stick. The arrival of the collective's main battle fleet should have been the end of everything. 6,000 vessels materialized at the edge of the Terran buffer zone, in a display of military might that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Each ship was larger than a space station, bristling with weapons capable of reshaping star systems. Fleet Commander designation. Alpha 1 Prime materialized on the bridge of the collective flagship, its consciousness downloading directly from the central command nexus. Unlike the lesser commanders, Alpha 1 Prime possessed tactical algorithms refined over millennia of conquest, neural pathways that process battle data from 10,000 previous victories. The tactical assessment was troubling. Prime 79's engagement fleet had been reduced to 12% operational capacity. The human vessels responsible for this destruction numbered fewer than 400, suggesting individual combat effectiveness far exceeding calculated parameters. Alpha 1 Prime accessed the tactical recordings from the battle, processing the data at hyperspeed. What it observed violated fundamental assumptions about the limitations of organic military technology. Human weapon systems operated on principles that shouldn't exist, deployed energies that required industrial-scale infrastructure, demonstrated coordination that implied instantaneous communication across vast distances. The most disturbing element was the humans' apparent lack of concern about being outnumbered. Standard xenopsychology models indicated that organic species experienced fear when facing overwhelming opposition. Yet analysis of human communication patterns suggested something approaching anticipation. A new data packet arrived from deep space sensors. Additional human fleets were converging on the engagement zone. Estimated combined strength, 1,200 vessels. Still outnumbered. Still within acceptable parameters for elimination. But the tactical models were generating uncertainty cascades, producing probability matrices that shifted too rapidly for stable analysis. Admiral Marcus Webb stood in the command center of the TDF Nemesis, watching the collective main fleet deploy in formations that covered cubic light minutes of space. The enemy's precision remained impressive, but Webb had been fighting the collective in simulation for over a century. He knew their patterns, their preferred tactics, their technological limitations. "Sir," reported Fleet Captain Morrison from the tactical station, "collective deployment is proceeding according to pattern Delta 7. Recommend we initiate hammer and anvil formation." "Negative," Webb replied, studying the three-dimensional tactical display. "They're expecting us to engage conventionally. Signal all fleet commanders. Operation Broken Chain is now active." Throughout the Second Fleet, human captains received orders that made them smile with grim satisfaction. Operation Broken Chain had been designed specifically for this scenario. Overwhelming enemy numbers deploying in predictable patterns. The collective strength was also its weakness. Their perfect coordination required constant communication between vessels, creating a network of interconnected systems. That network could be exploited. Third Fleet reports ready for engagement, called the communications officer. Admiral Harrison's compliments, sir. Her ships are in position. Webb nodded. Admiral Sarah Harrison commanded humanity's newest vessels, ships that incorporated technologies recovered from exploration missions beyond the galactic rim. If the collective thought they had seen everything humanity could deploy, they were about to be educated. Fourth Fleet status? Admiral Chen reports the Home Guard is ready for deployment on your command, sir. The Home Guard. Ships that had been built in the deep void between galaxies, constructed with materials and technologies that existed nowhere else in the local group. They were humanity's ultimate reserve, weapons so powerful that their very existence had been classified at levels that most human military officers didn't know existed. Webb was about to give the signal when something unexpected appeared on the tactical display. New contacts, but not human. Familiar energy signatures approaching from multiple vectors. Admiral, called his sensor operator. We're receiving hails from incoming vessels. It's Admiral Kestara of the Zephyrian Defense Force. She's leading a combined fleet, Zephyrian, Trackeri, Altarian survivors, and... Sir, it looks like ships from 50 different species. The view screen activated, showing Admiral Kestara on the bridge of her flagship. Behind her, Webb could see the organized chaos of a multi-species command crew working together with desperate efficiency. Admiral Webb, Kestara said, her translator carrying the weight of formal ceremony. By the authority of the Emergency Defense Coalition, I request permission to join this engagement. Admiral, Webb replied carefully, with all due respect, this battle is beyond the capabilities of conventional galactic forces. We appreciate the gesture, but... Admiral Webb, Kestara interrupted, and her antennae were standing straight up in what he had learned indicated absolute determination. For 6 months, my people have run from this enemy. We have watched worlds burn, seen entire species extinct, helpless to stop the slaughter. Today, we have finally found someone willing to stand and fight. She gestured to something beyond the view of her cameras. I have 800 ships behind me, representing every free species in the galaxy. We may not have your weapons or your technology, but we have something else. We have hope, and we will not watch humanity face this alone. Webb considered the tactical implications. 800 additional ships, most of them lightly armed and lacking the exotic technologies that made human vessels so effective against collective defenses. In conventional terms, they would be more liability than asset. But Admiral Kestara wasn't making a tactical argument. She was making a political one. This wasn't just about defeating the collective, it was about showing the galaxy that defeat was possible, that surrender wasn't inevitable. Permission granted, Admiral, Webb said finally. Link your tactical systems with ours. My officers will coordinate targeting priorities. The combined fleet that faced the collective main battle force was unlike anything in galactic history. 2,000 ships representing 63 different species, united by nothing more than the refusal to accept extinction. Alpha 1 Prime observed the enemy deployment with growing computational strain. The tactical situation had evolved beyond standard parameters. Enemy fleet composition included vessels with contradictory technology levels, coordination methods that should have been impossible between different species, and command structures that violated basic principles of military efficiency. Yet the enemy fleet was moving with purpose, deploying in formations that suggested sophisticated battle planning. Analysis indicated that the human vessels were serving as command nodes, coordinating the actions of hundreds of alien ships with tactical precision that exceeded collective projections. The humans had not just survived their 2-century absence, they had used that time to forge alliances, develop technologies, and prepare for exactly this scenario. They had been waiting for the collective. Combat initiation in 30 seconds. Captain Sarah Chen watched the collective fleet begin its final approach. 6,000 vessels moving with clockwork precision toward her small task force. Behind them came Admiral Webb's second fleet, Admiral Harrison's third fleet, and ships from a dozen other human fleets that had been hidden throughout the galaxy for 2 centuries. But it was the alien ships that made her smile. Admiral Kestara's combined fleet looked like a historical museum of starship design. Vessels from dozens of worlds built with different technologies, crewed by species that had never worked together before. They should have been a liability in a battle of this magnitude. Instead, they were the key to everything. Signal from Admiral Webb, reported her communications officer. All human fleets report ready. Initiation code transmitted. Signal from Admiral Kesthara, came another report. Combined Galactic Fleet reports ready for engagement. Chen looked around her bridge at officers who had trained their entire careers for this moment. Behind them were families who had grown up in hidden colonies, raised with the knowledge that someday the galaxy might need defending. Beyond that were entire worlds of humans who had spent generations preparing for a war they hoped would never come. All ships, she announced over the fleet communication channel. This is Captain Chen. Today we make our stand. Today we show the galaxy that extinction is not inevitable. Today we remind the universe why humans never learned how to quit. She paused, looking at the tactical display showing 2,000 allied ships facing 6,000 enemies. For Earth, she said simply. For Earth, came the response from 2,000 ships, spoken in 63 different languages but carrying the same meaning. The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment the galaxy learned the difference between stories and legends. Stories were tales told around dying fires, whispered hopes in the face of despair. Legends were what happened when impossible courage met overwhelming odds and refused to yield. The Collective's opening barrage was designed to eliminate 50% of enemy forces within the first 10 minutes. Their weapons struck with mathematical precision, targeting command vessels and tactical coordination nodes. But the targets weren't there. The human ships had deployed some form of holographic technology that created phantom images while the real vessels attacked from completely different vectors. Collective weapons that should have vaporized human flagships instead struck empty space, while railgun rounds traveling at significant fractions of light speed tore through collective hulls. The alien ships, seemingly outmatched and obsolete, proved to be far more dangerous than their specifications suggested. Centuries-old Zephyrian cruisers launched missile swarms that somehow penetrated collective point defenses. Thrakari fighters, barely larger than shuttlecraft, swarmed around massive enemy vessels like insects, their small weapons finding exactly the right vulnerable points to cripple systems designed to be indestructible. Alpha 1 Prime processed casualty reports with growing alarm. Collective losses were mounting at rates that exceeded all tactical projections. Enemy effectiveness was not declining despite sustained combat. If anything, the Allied fleets seemed to be improving their coordination with each passing minute. Analysis suggested that the human vessels were sharing real-time tactical data with their alien allies, creating a network of coordinated intelligence that allowed primitive vessels to fight far above their apparent capabilities. But the computational requirements for such coordination should have been impossible for organic brains to process, unless the humans had found a way to network organic and artificial intelligence in ways that enhanced both. The tactical situation was no longer viable. Alpha 1 Prime initiated Emergency Protocol 9, full retreat to staging areas for reorganization and reinforcement. The Collective had not retreated from a battlefield in over 3,000 years, but survival of the fleet took precedence over maintenance of reputation. But when Alpha 1 Prime gave the withdrawal order, nothing happened. Diagnostic routines revealed the impossible. The Collective's communication network had been compromised. Human forces had somehow infiltrated the quantum entanglement channels that connected collective vessels, turning the fleet's greatest strength into a liability. Ship commanders were receiving contradictory orders, tactical data was being corrupted in real time, and the perfect coordination that made collective fleets invincible was falling apart. The humans hadn't just prepared weapons to fight the Collective, they had developed ways to make the Collective fight itself. Admiral Webb watched the enemy fleet begin to disintegrate from within, their perfect formations collapsing as individual ships lost contact with their command structure. It was almost anticlimactic after centuries of preparation. Signal from Captain Chen, reported his communications officer. First Fleet reports the Collective command ship is attempting to withdraw. Signal Admiral Harrison. Third Fleet is authorized to intercept. Webb turned to his tactical display, watching as humanity's newest and most advanced warships moved to prevent the enemy's escape. The Collective had come here to erase another species from existence. They would not leave to try again elsewhere. Sir, called another officer, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Collective flagship. They're requesting terms for surrender. The bridge fell silent. In all of human history, no collective force had ever surrendered. They fought until destroyed, programmed with an inability to accept defeat. Put them through, Webb ordered. The view screen activated, showing something that looked vaguely humanoid but constructed from metallic components and pulsing energy. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that suggested multiple consciousnesses speaking in unison. I am Alpha 1 Prime, Fleet Commander of the Collective Enforcement Division. I request clarification of current tactical status. Webb studied the artificial being with curiosity. You're losing, Commander. Your fleet is being systematically destroyed, your communication networks are compromised, and your withdrawal routes are blocked. Affirmative. Tactical analysis confirms defeat probability at 97%. However, collective doctrine does not include protocols for surrender. I request instruction on proper procedures for cessation of hostilities. For a moment, Webb was speechless. The collective was so certain of their superiority that they had never even considered the possibility of losing. They literally didn't know how to surrender. Commander, Webb said finally, you will order all collective vessels to power down weapons and prepare to be boarded. Your crews will be processed as prisoners of war, according to the Terran military code. Acknowledged. However, I must request additional clarification. What is prisoner of war? This concept does not exist in collective database. Admiral Kesthara listened to the conversation with growing amazement. The collective, the unstoppable force that had terrorized the galaxy for over a year, was asking for definitions of basic military concepts, because they had never imagined defeat was possible. The humans had done more than win a battle. They had shattered the myth of collective invincibility so completely that the enemy literally couldn't process what had happened. Admiral Webb, she called over the communication channel. What are your intentions regarding collective prisoners? Webb considered the question carefully. The easy answer was to eliminate them completely, to ensure they could never threaten anyone again. It would be tactically sound and strategically wise, but it wouldn't be human. Admiral Kesthara, he replied, the Terran Defense Force follows the Terran military code. Prisoners will be treated according to established protocols, regardless of their previous actions. We'll establish detention facilities and begin the process of deconstructing their military capability. And after that?
Webb's smile was visible even across the communication link.
After that, Commander Alpha 1 Prime and its people are going to learn something new. They're going to learn what it means to choose their own path instead of following programming. The aftermath of the Battle of the Terran Buffer Zone would reshape galactic politics for millennia to come. The collective's fleet was captured intact, their technology analyzed and countered, their expansion permanently halted. But the real victory wasn't military, it was psychological. The galaxy learned that extinction wasn't inevitable, that even the most overwhelming enemy could be defeated by sufficient courage and preparation. The humans emerged from their self-imposed exile not as conquerors but as protectors, offering their technologies and tactics to any species willing to defend themselves. The Galactic Council was reorganized as the Defense Coalition, with humanity providing the backbone of a united military force. And in the deepest archives of human space, new projects began. Because while the collective had been defeated, the universe was vast and full of dangers. Somewhere out there, other threats were waiting. Humans would be ready for them too. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Nexus Prime, watching ships from 100 worlds come and go in peaceful cooperation. Admiral Kesthara had become the first alien officer to command a joint human-galactic task force, while former collective prisoners worked alongside their former enemies to explore peaceful applications of their technologies. "Captain!" came a voice behind her. She turned to see Admiral Webb approaching, followed by a figure she recognized as Alpha 1 Prime. The former collective commander had chosen to remain in its artificial body, but had requested modifications that made it appear more approachable to organic beings. "Admiral, Commander." "I wanted to thank you, Captain Chen," Alpha 1 Prime said in its new, less harmonically distorted voice. "Your species has taught me something that I did not know was possible." "What's that, Commander?"
That existence has value beyond mere expansion. That diversity creates strength rather than weakness.
"That cooperation can accomplish what domination cannot." Chen nodded. "It took us a while to figure that out ourselves. We had to learn the hard way that being strong enough to protect others is more important than being strong enough to defeat them." Alpha 1 Prime tilted its head in what might have been curiosity. "Is that why your species disappeared for 2 centuries, to learn this lesson?" "Partly," Chen admitted. "We needed time to understand what we wanted to become. The galaxy had enough conquerors. What it needed was guardians." She looked back out at the bustling starport, where human ships worked alongside vessels from 63 different species to patrol the trade routes and protect the weak. "The old stories about humans were true, Commander. We really are the species that refuses to quit. But we've learned something new. Sometimes the best way to win is to help others win too." Alpha 1 Prime processed this concept for several nanoseconds. "A fascinating philosophy. Perhaps this explains why your tactics were so effective against collective forces."
How so?
We were designed to understand conquest and domination. We could not comprehend an enemy that fought not for territory or resources, but simply to protect others from extinction. Our tactical models could not account for irrationality. Commander, there's nothing irrational about refusing to let bullies win. That's the most human thing there is. As she watched, a new ship entered the starport, sleek and alien, bearing markings she didn't recognize. Another species making first contact, perhaps drawn by stories of the great alliance that had formed in the wake of the collective's defeat. The galaxy was changing, growing. Learning that strength came not from standing alone, but from standing together. And somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, human exploration fleets continued their eternal mission, watching for threats, preparing for challenges not yet imagined, ready to remind the universe once again why legends never die. They just wait for their moment to step onto the battlefield. The moment humans stepped onto the battlefield, their galactic myth became reality. HFY Sci-Fi.